Nathaniel Cross had mastered the art of curated perfection. At 35, he was the kind of man who turned heads without trying, tall, athletic, and effortlessly charming. Every morning, he rose before dawn to run 5 miles along the fog-draped coastline, returning home just in time to flip blueberry pancakes for his kids. His wife, Vivian, was a vision, an ex-model turned lifestyle influencer with a following built on filtered brunches, faux humility, and seductive captions. Together, they were the embodiment of aspirational living. Their home in Maple Bridge looked like a magazine spread. Cream walls, gold accents, laughter echoing through the halls. But beneath the sheen, fissures spidered through the foundation. Vivian's touch had grown perfunctory. Her kisses were colder, her glances evasive. Sex had become transactional, performed more for control than connection. Nate tried not to notice. He convinced himself her distance was exhaustion or ennui. But deep down, a quiet dread had begun to bloom. Something was shifting. When she took longer to return from brand trips, when her phone buzzed late at night with messages she never opened in front of him, when her laughter stopped sounding real, the illusion began to unravel. And yet, Nate clung to it. Because perfect lives don't just implode. Or so he thought. The morning of the accident was deceptively ordinary, cloaked in routine and sunlight. Nate kissed his kids on their syrup-sticky cheeks, promised to pick up cupcakes for Isabel's class party, and watched Vivian glide through the kitchen in silken irritation. Phone pressed to her ear, barely mouthing goodbye. The sky was a watercolor blue, the air crisp with early spring. He took the scenic route to work, the ocean glittering to his left, and an old soul record spinning from his stereo. Then came the roar. A guttural blast of horn, the scream of tires on asphalt, and a split-second blur of chrome and violence. A freight truck, oversized, overspeeding, slammed into Nate's car like a fist through glass. Metal crumpled like paper, glass shards flew like confetti in a grotesque celebration. And then, silence. When he opened his eyes 2 days later, the world had changed. White ceiling tiles blinked above him. His body refused to respond. It was as if someone had unplugged him from the waist down. A nurse's voice, soft and cautious, informed him he was alive, barely. The diagnosis came like a guillotine. Crushed vertebrae, severe nerve damage, possible permanent paralysis. In the days that followed, Vivian's absence became conspicuous. No perfume lingering in the sheets, no perfectly manicured hand brushing his hair back. Just a few cryptic texts and a bouquet sent with a generic card. Nate lay in that hospital bed, broken in both body and belief, unaware that the wreckage wasn't just his spine. It was his entire life unraveling, one unreturned message at a time. The truth didn't arrive with a bang. It slipped in quietly, like a shadow through a cracked door. It began with hushed confusion, a nurse mentioning, offhand, that no one had visited in days. Nate blinked, then stared at the wilting bouquet on the nightstand. 4 days old, not even signed. Doubt slithered in. He called Vivian. Voicemail. Again. On the 5th try. Her voice answered, cool, clip, distracted. I've been busy, she said, her words wrapped in guiltless silk. Nate swallowed his hurt, said nothing. But the facade fractured further when Julian, his oldest friend, dropped by with a styrofoam cup of coffee and eyes full of pity. I didn't want to tell you, he began, hesitating. But people are talking. Nate listened in stunned silence as Julian described seeing Vivian, done up like a goddess, slipping into the passenger seat of a vintage Bentley, laughing at something a man with silver hair and a diamond watch had whispered in her ear. His name's Damian Holloway, Julian added. Tech billionaire, widower, known for entertaining younger company. Nate's stomach churned. The name Damian rang through his mind like a church bell, tolling ruin. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was calculated abandonment. While he lay motionless in a sterile room, Vivian was already living in another man's penthouse, playing the grieving ex-wife to a new, wealthy benefactor. Nate didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just stared at the wall, the light from the window casting long, accusatory shadows. And in his chest, something fragile and furious began to stir. Vivian returned without warning, draped in a crimson sheath dress that clung to her like scandal, stilettos clicking against the linoleum floor of Nate's hospital room like a ticking clock. Her makeup was immaculate, lips a shade too red for a hospital visit, and her perfume rolled in before her like a storm cloud. She didn't kiss his forehead, didn't touch his hand, just set down a sleek leather folder beside his water cup and looked away. "These are the papers," she said, voice glazed in something between boredom and finality. Nate blinked, disoriented. "What papers?" he croaked, though some corner of him already knew. "Divorce." The word hit harder than the truck ever could. "I'm still young," she said, tone arid and unapologetic. "Still wanted. I can't waste the rest of my life playing nursemaid." Nate felt something twist inside him. Rage, grief, humiliation, all folding into silence. What happened to in sickness and in health? He whispered. She shrugged, unapologetic. Nobody really means that part. She paused at the door, turning just enough to deliver her final cruelty. "Damien makes me feel things you haven't in years. He doesn't pity me, and he doesn't need help getting it up." And she was gone. No who, no epalegi. Just the echo of her heels and the smell of expensive betrayal. Nate stared at the folder on his tray table. It sat there like a gravestone, and as the sun dipped beyond the blinds, he realized the woman he had loved for over a decade had already buried him. The nights that followed were a kaleidoscope of agony and strange arousal, a brutal cocktail of humiliation, heartbreak, and hunger. Alone in the dim hospital room, Nate lay trapped inside his own skin, a man once carved for motion, now reduced to stillness. The sterile silence became deafening, broken only by the mechanical sigh of machines and the ticking of a wall clock that sounded like mockery. But it wasn't just pain that haunted him, it was memory. Vivian's laugh as she pulled him into the shower, the feel of her breath against his ear, the flash of red lingerie on a night she once called unforgettable. Now, those memories clawed at his mind like ghosts, equal parts torment and temptation. He hated that he still craved her. He hated that his body, broken though it was, pulsed with need. Desire didn't die with dignity. It howled through him at midnight when shame had the loudest voice. Sometimes he'd shut his eyes and imagine her, not as she left him, but as she once was, wild, ravenous, whispering filthy promises in the dark. Other times, the images turned cruel, of her bent over for someone else, mouth open in laughter not meant for him, eyes gleaming with lust he would never feel again. Nate wanted to scream, to punch through walls he couldn't reach. He wanted to forget her touch, her scent, the grip of her thighs. But mostly, he wanted revenge, not with fists or fury, but by becoming a man so whole she'd choke on her own regret. Raven Delano entered Nate's world like a lit match in a gasoline storm. Cool, untouchable, and maddeningly magnetic. She wasn't the kind of physical therapist they assigned by default. She was the kind men fantasized about long after the session ended. Ink swirled along her forearms like secrets, and her voice carried the kind of low, knowing timbre that made your skin remember it. She didn't pity him. She didn't speak in slow, careful sympathy. She tossed a rolled yoga mat at his chest and said, "You're not dead. Let's act like it." Nate hated her at first, hated how she challenged him, how she saw straight through his bitterness, how she smiled like she knew every dark place he'd been. But somewhere between the grimaces and the sweat, she got under his skin. During one session, while adjusting his shoulder with her body close, heat surged between them, tangible, electric. Her breath hitched. So did his. She didn't pull away. Instead, her lips brushed his ear, and she whispered, "You still have power. You just forgot how to use it." That night, he didn't dream of Vivian. He dreamed of Raven, of her mouth, her hands, her voice. Something had awakened. In her presence, he felt more man than machine, more fire than fracture. She teased him with her glances, dared him with her smirks. Nate didn't know if she was testing him or seducing him, but it didn't matter. For the first time in months, after a brutal session of resistance training that left Nate breathless and burning, not just with effort, but with need, the clinic was nearly empty. Rain whispering against the windows like temptation incarnate. Raven leaned over him, her breath warm, her voice a low purr. "You're stronger than you think," she said, fingertips brushing his jaw. Nate's self-control snapped. He grabbed her wrist, eyes locked on hers, not asking, claiming. She didn't flinch. Instead, she slid into his lap, her body folding against his like it belonged there. Their mouths met in a kiss that was nothing soft or hesitant. It was war. It was surrender. Her hands found his shoulders, nails dragging down muscle that still remembered how to command. Against the padded table where pain used to rule, It wasn't polished or pretty. It was raw, real, and honest. For the first time since the accident, Nate didn't feel broken. He felt dangerous, desired, alive. When it was over, she stayed on his lap, kissing the corner of his mouth, whispering, "Told you. Still got it." And in that moment, he knew this was just the beginning. Nate rose like smoke from a fire that never quite went out, scarred but unextinguished. With Raven beside him, both as partner and provocateur, he refused to fade quietly into a life of limitations. Instead, he did the unthinkable, launched Eros and Ivy, an event company that dared to blend sensual aesthetics with luxury design, weddings laced with bold romance, anniversaries curated with erotic elegance, and clandestine retreats for couples craving something wilder than vanilla vows. It was controversial, whispered about in elite circles, but wildly successful. People couldn't get enough of the taboo elegance, the whispered promise of passion behind every velvet curtain. Raven handled design, provocative yet tasteful, sleek but carnal, while Nate orchestrated the experience. His mind, sharp as ever, mapped every detail with military precision. What once had been hospital routines and therapy schedules were now client meetings in candlelit lounges and late-night strategy sessions over wine. His wheelchair, once a symbol of what he'd lost, now rolled with authority through venues draped in silk and rose petals. Women flirted with him, men admired him. He was no longer the man who'd been left. He was the man people wanted to become. Vivian, ever curious and always watching, caught wind of it through an influencer's tag post. One look at the sultry branding, at Nate in a tailored black suit and Raven in heels and fire, and she choked on the realization. The man she abandoned had become a king, and his empire was built not in spite of the pain, but because of it. Vivian reappeared like a ghost wrapped in designer silk, uninvited, unwelcome, and dripping with desperation. She stepped into the lobby of Eros and Ivy during a high-profile vendor event. Her heels sharp on marble, eyes scanning for Nate like a predator searching for prey. She hadn't aged poorly, but something in her beauty had curdled, like milk left out too long under the wrong kind of spotlight. "We need to talk," she hissed, grabbing Nate's arm as he wheeled by. Surrounded by photographers and event sponsors, Raven appeared instantly at his side, all cool poise and devastating confidence. The air went still. Vivian launched into a tirade, accusing him of brainwashing the kids, of parading his fake family to make her look bad. "You manipulated them, turned them against me." When she realized her tantrum had drawn a small, fascinated crowd, her veneer cracked. "I gave you my best years," she snapped. "You owe me something." Nate's laugh was soft but lethal. "I owe you nothing." He rolled away with Raven at his side, their exit silent and cutting. And as Vivian stood alone in a sea of polished strangers, she realized she hadn't just lost Nate. She'd lost her audience. Victory didn't come with confetti. It came with silence. A thick, staggering silence as Nate stared down at the compensation check like it was a relic from a parallel universe. 12 years of agony, legal manipulation, and corporate deflection had finally cracked under the weight of undeniable truth. The logistics company folded under the pressure of damning evidence, forced to pay not only for his pain, but for the years stolen by their negligence. Nate held the check in shaking hands, not from greed, but from closure. It wasn't about the money. It was about being seen, acknowledged, vindicated. He called Laura and Ethan immediately. "We won," he whispered, voice trembling. Their cheers over the phone weren't just celebration. They were healing. That night, as the sun dipped behind the wildflower field near his home, he sat on the porch with Raven curled beside him, Julian asleep upstairs, and the future no longer feeling like a stranger. "Let's build the house right," he murmured. "Rooms for everyone. A home that's finally whole." Raven smiled, kissed his temple, and for the first time in over a decade, Nate exhaled without weight on his chest. Nate's journey is a reminder that life can fracture overnight, but healing, though slow and painful, is possible when you fight for your worth. In today's world, where appearances often mask deeper wounds, it's vital to remember that resilience isn't just surviving. It's rebuilding with purpose. If you've been betrayed, abandoned, or broken, don't let bitterness be your legacy. Use the pain as fuel. Invest in your growth. Surround yourself with truth-tellers and never underestimate your ability to evolve. Your worth isn't defined by who left. It's revealed by how you rise. And sometimes